Hi, this is Pete Weichlein. I'm the CEO of the Former Members of Congress Association, and I'm thrilled that you're joining us again for Congress at a Crossroads, our monthly video cast, bringing a Republican and a Democratic former member together on the topic of the day. And I appreciate our partnership with the Fulcrum, which has been a wonderful platform for us, and I appreciate all of you tuning in. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by two former senators, Senator Blanche Lincoln, who represented as a Democrat the great state of Arkansas, first in the House of Representatives from 1993 to 1997, and then in the US Senate from 1999 until 2011. And Senator Norm Coleman, a Republican from Minnesota, who represented Minnesota in the Senate from 2003 until 2009. I thank you to both of you for joining us. The purpose of our video cast is to showcase that Republicans and Democrats most definitely can get along, can have a productive conversation, can listen to each other, and can derive new information and a new point of view that may help them solve some of the problems of the day. And unfortunately, we're not seeing enough of that on Capitol Hill, but we're seeing a lot of it by our former members, and I appreciate you giving us your time and your insight. Conversation today is about the most fundamental component of our representative democracy, and that's voting. The ability to cast a vote, the right to cast a vote. And ever since the 2020 election, many folks have cast doubt on how secure our system is, whether a vote really counts, whether folks are able to manipulate the outcome of an election, and whether we can trust the outcome of an election. And it's the beginning of 2021. Candidates across the country are running for Congress, and quite a few of them are campaigning on this very issue, revisiting the 2020 election and casting into doubt the sanctity of our electoral process. So with that, let me ask you first, Senator Lincoln, particularly keeping in mind that across the country at state legislatures, literally hundreds of bills are being crafted and passed focused on the way we elect our representatives, both at the state and the federal level. How urgent is this time in our nation's history to take a look at our electoral process and either fix it or given the credibility it deserves?
Well, thank you, Pete, for all your hard work at FMC and the entire team over at FMC, because they do a tremendous job, and it's wonderful, an honor and a privilege to work with you all in so many different ways. And I'm delighted to be here with one of my favorites, Senator Norm Coleman, who we overlapped in our service in the Senate, and just a great guy. So I'm delighted to get to be with Norm for sure. I would say to your question there, and I could go on for days, it is essential. It is urgent. It's all of the above. If people don't understand that our democratic republic, the democracy that we have here in this great country, it is so dependent on not only the right to vote, but the participation to vote. And there's no one entity out there that's going to make it happen. You know, it is my dad grew up in a small town, same small town I grew up in, loved it dearly, served his country twice. The first time at the end of World War II in the occupation, or the Civil War, beginning of the Civil War in Korea, which couldn't have been fun as an infantryman in the Army. And then going back in the Air Force later on through the Air Force ROTC after he'd gotten his college degree. And he was adamant about this great country we live in and all that it has to offer us. And he said, you know, he always said to us, he said, I will never, ever tell you how to vote. He said, but I will quickly lose my respect for you if you do not vote. He said, he used to say to us, how important the whole process of voting was. But he said to democracy itself, that, if those who are governed by our democratic republic and our democracy, if those who are served by that do not participate in it, it doesn't work. It works only when those who are governed participate in it. And that means everybody's voices. I'm pretty sure Norm and I probably agreed on more than we disagreed. But the fact was that when we disagreed, we talked about it and we were respectful. And that's what has to happen. We have to begin teaching children at an earlier age. There's way too much on their plates right now. When I think about, my children are older now, but still the distractions that they have, the amount of information coming at them, some of it good, some of it bad, some of it honest, some of it not so honest. We have to ensure that they know that it works and they have to participate in it. And one of the alarming things there is you look, and that is those that are over 50 that are voting is a disproportionate share than those that are under 50 voting. And so, if our children don't understand the importance of participating in this process and in this whole exercise of a democracy, then where are we going to be? So I think education is a critical part of it. And I think, making sure that people understand it's not perfect. I never thought I was going to get everything I wanted when I ran for elected office. But I knew I had to try, and I knew I had to give it my best shot, which meant not being ugly to my colleagues, but reaching out and building relationships. When I first came to the Congress, actually was as a staffer in 1982. And what I saw working in the House of Representatives at that time was amazing. It was people that were really more connected over their regional issues because we had regional caucuses. So if you were from my region, which was Mississippi, Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Louisiana, the whole corridor down the Mississippi River area, and parts to the west too. But if we kind of coalesced around the issues that we really had a common interest in and worked our differences out there, we had success. But people don't do that anymore. They coalesce around the political aspect of things as opposed to the issues. And that's what makes me worry about future generations. If they're not thinking about the issues and they're not focusing on all of the issues that occur, but certainly from a regional standpoint, because I think that is so important. That's where the bonds are built, and that's where you start with the things that you agree on, and then you move towards the places where maybe you can't agree, but you learn to do it without being disagreeable. And so I think that, we've got a lot of work to do. And we need to make sure that we are focused on making sure that this democracy works. And there's a really good piece out, I don't know, maybe it was last week or the week before, that our friend Martin Frost did, talking about how other countries saw us, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Really more like 20, no, it's more like 30 years ago now that I think about it. And they looked at us as the model of perfection in terms of democracy and people's rights and building a strong government that was thoughtful and fair and equal to everybody. And then we let go. We really stopped working at that. And that's one of the great things that FMC does, is reaching out to some of those emerging democracies where we can visit with those that are getting, their balance and getting steady in terms of what democracy is about. And we've got to set a better example, because it's not just us, it's the world that looks to us in many instances for so much of that example. So I don't know, maybe I'm preaching already, but I just think there's a lot of room. And if there's one thing that my good friend Bill Emerson from Southern Missouri taught me when I first got to the U.S. House of Representatives, I was his neighbor. I called him and I said, Bill, I don't know you very well, but I do know where I come from. I'm probably supposed to bring you a pie or something because you're my new neighbor. But don't have time for that right now. But I do want to meet you. I want to get to know you and understand how we can find ways to work together. We talked for almost an hour. And he said, I have talked more to you in my first conversation with you than I did your predecessor in almost 20 years. And I said, well, you're going to keep hearing from me. So we immediately started what we called the Civility Caucus. I think it lasted 3 months. My husband said there was not enough scotch in all of Washington to keep it going. But nonetheless, we coalesced around the things that we agreed on. When we really got to a point where we couldn't agree, we thanked each other for the friendship that we had and moved on to something, we could. So there's a lot more to be done here. And my brother here from the Senate, my Senate days, knows a lot more than I do. But nonetheless, that's my first swat at it.
And Senator Coleman, I mean, I don't think there's a Republican out there who would disagree with anything Senator Lincoln just shared. But there are, 50 Republicans who are, using the filibuster to keep these two pieces of legislation from moving forward. And by no means would I say, well, they don't want to have every American vote. Their argument is, A, it's a state issue, and B, there are inherent problems in the system that the 2020 election kind of laid bare, not to the point where we call into question the outcome of the election, but procedural problems, the way absentee ballots are handled and so forth. So I'm not presuming you can give me the insight to 50.
Let me jump in. Yeah, Pete. And first of all, let me start by saying I do associate myself with so much of what the gentlewoman from Arkansas has said, certainly about the importance of the issue, no question about it. And also let me start by acknowledging FMC and the work they do, bringing together the Norm Colemans, the Blanche Lincolns, and so many others, which I think is important. And we hopefully we can still give back. Hopefully we can still make a difference. And many of us involved in many efforts on policy even to this day. But I think it's really important, Pete, to separate one. No one argues about the importance of the issue. Everyone wants easier voting, but they want it to be integral. No one is against that. No one's against that. And so the question is it worth fighting the fight that we're now? You raised the filibuster, and I'm sure we're going to get to that. Is it worth changing the core of the Senate over this issue? And I think you got to say no. The fact is, America, as we're not perfect, but are there many arguing that America is in crisis today, a voting crisis? We had the highest turnout in over 120 years in the last election. Turnout among minorities has been overwhelming. There's no constitutional crisis here. We have some different perspectives. Republicans are concerned, and they go back to the Constitution and say, voting electoral issues are principally the states. And if you even look at what's going on, it was a reaction to the 2020 election, and some people, by the way, challenge that. And by the way, and just recently, we have the president and the vice president questioning the integrity of the next election if changes aren't made. Changes which groups like No Labels have said, if you look back at, they're really mostly administrative things, time periods in voting. Changes, by the way, that Georgia was just crucified for the changes it made, and yet, Democrats attacked things like voter ID. Rhode Island has had voter ID for a decade. Delaware, the state that the president comes from, has in many ways more restrictive laws when it comes to absentee ballot, early balloting than Georgia. And so my point being is, there are a variety of approaches. We all agree on the same goal here. We want to maximize participation, all the reasons that Blanche, Senator Lincoln articulated. Young people have to understand, my dad was there on the shores of Normandy in the early morning hours. Many of his brothers never made it past there. Thank God he returned home, wounded, but returned home. People have sacrificed so much for this great democracy that we have, and voting is at the core of it. But I think, and by the way, I'm just not saying that. I think the American public is saying what I'm saying. I don't think the American public is clamoring about electoral reform. They're clamoring about inflation, price of gasoline. They're clamoring about crime. They're clamoring about, murder rates going through the roof. They're concerned about what's happening in the border. They're concerned about there's going to be a war with Russia. I looked at a Pew survey poll, and it had out of like 25 issues, electoral reform was like 20th or something compared to things like inflation, the economy, immigration, security, personal security, national security. And so in the end, I think what a terrible tragedy it would be to proceed down a route of changing Senate rules, and rules that, by the way, Democrats, that in 2017, 61 senators signed a letter petition, saying that we got to keep the filibuster. 31 Democrats were part of that, 27 still serving the Senate. Senator Schumer in the past has talked about the checks and balances of the core of the Constitution being the filibuster. It answers what separated us from the House. The House is a majority rule. Okay, everything, once you're the majority, it's your way or the highway. That's it. And the Senate provides that balance. And if we lose that balance, if the 50 point, right now we have the closest majority that we've had, the president winning an election by 43,000 votes. If you look at the electoral votes in 3 states, that would have changed the presidential election. So out of how many million, 150 million, 43,000 decides the election, 50-50 Senate, 5-seat majority in the House. And are we going to let the 50.1% say that we're going to have it our way without any input from the 49.9%? Pete, if you do that, okay, this democracy will have issues. If folks think that they're changing the rules, that a federal takeover elections, that we're going to change the way in which we operate from folks on my side saying we're going to give the other side the ability to kind of keep their majority forever. If Americans believe that over an issue that right now is not the most burning issue for them, it's a good issue to discuss. It's an issue being discussed in legislators. It's good to have these debates, but let's not talk about changing the way the beauty of the Senate. Ensuring that in fact, and when I was there, we'd have an issue and we need 60. And the leader would say, who can speak to Blanche Lincoln and Mark Pryor and Mary Landrieu? And I'm sure on the other side, when they were majority, they said, who can speak to Norm Coleman and Gordon Smith and Susan Collins and Olympia Snowe? And I would raise my hand and say, I could. I'll see if we can. And so we were forced to have that. And if you lose that, I really think you lose what makes the Senate important. I think you lose kind of the vibrancy of this democracy that we have, and I think that you would then inflame a large number of Americans who think that they're being shut out by a very, very, very narrow majority. So yes, important issue, very important, but let's not, in trying to deal with it, upend what at one point, Chuck Schumer talked about it, the core of American democracy, the checks and balances that the filibuster represents.
I would just add to that, Norm makes some very good points, without a doubt. Rules are for a reason, however, and I think the filibuster, obviously in its origination, was about protecting the minority rights. And that's important. Because I don't know, Norm, I think you and I served several times together in whether it was a 50-50 Senate or a 60-40 Senate or a 51-49 Senate. Like you said, we were always there in the middle, kind of the monkey in the middle. It's like, okay, who's going to help break this 50-50 or whatever? So, there's no doubt that we want to protect the minority's right. And the ability for the Congress to work as it should, which is trying to find the sweet spot of where the majority of people really are on an issue. And that makes sense. Both sides have been extremely guilty, in my opinion, of using the filibuster or the issue of the filibuster to distract people. When you get to those very narrow margins, they do. But nothing is as bad as the politics of it. And that's what's horrible, because you get to these issues that are critical And if the filibuster can be used just in the discussion of it, you know, whether it's, oh, we're going to change it, or, oh, we're over my dead body, that distracts people from the real issue. You know, voting rights. Again, my first election in '92 was the first time I saw the unbelievable, well, maybe it was '94, but the unbelievable amount of outside money coming into my small, very poor, one of the poorest areas in the country in terms of poverty in the Mississippi Delta, one of the poorest congressional districts in the country, the amount of outside money coming in to that district, which is not what it's supposed to be. And so from that came this unbelievable tsunami of just politics, not policy, not, you know, political persuasion. It was just politics that was bought and that was created from people outside of who should really be voting. And then you get, again, from my perspective, in an area where there has been a lot of unfortunate circumstances. I mean, in my last election in 2010 in the Senate, you know, the number of elderly Black women that were told they no longer voted in that voting precinct when they did. I mean, the number of volunteer lawyers we had to represent in the prosecutions or the cases that were brought up and some of the prosecutions, it was unheard of. I mean, and that's not to say one side or the other is any better. Everybody gets to playing too much politics and they forget about what the whole idea of this system is about. It's about, again, the participation of getting more people to participate and understand their government and what they want, and having the ability to express that in a way. I mean, you know, not letting somebody give out water bottles in line. I mean, I don't know. It was just crazy in some of these last ones. So there's a place for, you know, without a doubt, every one of us coming to the table and understanding the importance of the freedom to vote and to get out and vote and make that happen. And I just think there's this big ping pong game going of Democrats and Republicans, whoever's in charge of who's going to fight that. We need to sit down and talk about how unbelievably precious it is to us, to every one of us in this country, and figure out a way to make that happen. And I hope.
So let me be the optimist here. There's an opportunity right now in which Democrats and Republicans are actually talking about doing something together on electoral reform. Yep. That's electoral college reform. Susan Collins leading the way. A number of Democrats. You know, let's first of all, I think it would be great to the American public so that folks can actually still work together. They don't in the House again, but the House is a different body. It just is a different body. But in the Senate, there still is that opportunity. And Blanche knows, you know, you'd see folks go, you know, toe to toe on C-SPAN, but then we'd go back to our hideaways in the Capitol and we'd sit down and we'd have a conversation amongst ourselves. And so you have an issue like that in which I think there is opportunity for common ground. The fact is the vice president should not have been put, or should not be in a position where one should even question whether he's following the Constitution. He followed the Constitution. He did what he needed to do. But the fact that you can have debate about that is crazy. And so, you know, there is now a discussion about let's kind of put that, let's make sure that we don't have those kind of issues. And so where there is common, I'm just a believer that the body right now needs something which show people who work together. And by the way, I think the administration needs it. Okay? I really do. I think you got to say, hey, we can actually work together. But this, you know, thing about if you don't support us, it's Jim Crow and it's racist this and it's racist that. When in fact, again, in many of the blue states, you have laws that are similar, if not tougher in some areas. If we can move away from that at this point, find some common ground. And then, you know, and by the way, keep promoting people voting. We had huge turnout. The numbers were stunning in the last election. They really were. And that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. And you know, let's keep at it.
I always I always like to end our video cast on a positive note, so I'd love to use that. And I wrote a column defending the filibuster. I mean, I got my professional start as a Senate staffer. And I agree with you, Senator Coleman. If you reduce it then to simple majority, what's the difference between the Senate and the House? And if both of you are saying we need to protect the filibuster because it will lead to debate, it will lead to compromise, it will lead to crossing the political aisle and forcing senators to do so, then it's worth protecting.
And you know, it's not always bad for it to be hard to get things done.
Yeah.
You know, as Blanche says, one of the worst things in Washington is the sin of unintended consequences. One of the beauties of the Senate process is that you know, you have time to deliberate, you have time to think, and when we don't do that, you run into issues. And Blanche and I have seen the results of that. And by the way, once you do something, tough to undo it. Tough to really undo it.
That's true too.
Right.
Yeah.
So you know, if we can, let's keep the integrity of the institution, but let's also be prepared to try to find common ground, and then let's not be afraid to deal with challenging issues. Hopefully in an integrate way, and hopefully with a goal ultimately on solving people's problems rather than creating greater divides.
Yes. And I think if you add some integrity to the political process, you will see a lot of those other issues in terms of the electoral issues and the filibuster and all of that go away. People don't feel quite so threatened.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole nother video cast. We can talk about the role of money in politics. We can talk about the incredible harm social media has done to our political process. And don't even get me started on gerrymandered House districts. But that's another 20 minutes we'll spend some other time.
Well, you'll give it second thought before you get me and Norm on again.
No, this was great. I mean, you both showcase exactly what FMC is about, which is, you know, you're public servants at heart, as are current members of Congress. It doesn't have to be a former member who can put, you know, country over party. That happens on Capitol Hill all the time. Just no one highlights it. It's not what you'll see on the cable news shows. But these are all dedicated public servants who want to make the country better, and we can do so by working together. And you showcase what that looks like. So thank you both very much.
Very humble. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Love you, Senator Lincoln. You're the best.
I love you right back.
Thank you both. Bye.